"Whoever cooked this dinner should never be allowed near a kitchen again," my daughter-in-law said, lifting her wineglass as if she had just made the cleverest joke in the room. A few people laughed because that is what people do when a beautiful woman in a cream silk blouse smiles first and gives them permission. My son Daniel looked down at his plate. My granddaughter Grace stopped chewing. And I, Margaret Whitmore, 68 years old, sitting at the far end of my own son's dining table like an extra chair no one had asked for, folded my hands in my lap and smiled. Not because it was funny, not because it did not hurt, but because every bite on that table had passed through my hands before anyone in that room ever saw it. The pot roast Ashley had just mocked had been trimmed, seasoned, and slow-cooked by me for 6 hours. The buttermilk biscuits she called dense little rocks had come from the same recipe Daniel used to beg for when he was 10 years old and homesick from school. The green beans, the mashed potatoes, the gravy with just enough black pepper, even the peach cobbler cooling under a white towel in the kitchen, all of it was mine. Ashley just did not know that yet. The dinner was being held in Daniel and Ashley's renovated colonial home outside Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of house where every room smelled faintly of lemon polish and money. There were linen napkins folded like fans, taper candles in brass holders, fresh hydrangeas in the center of the table, and 12 guests Ashley had carefully chosen to admire her. Her friends from the country club, Daniel's boss and his wife, a local food blogger whose name Ashley had repeated 3 times before dinner, as if having her there turned roast beef into public relations. I had been seated near the kitchen doorway, not beside Daniel, not near the honored guests, but in the place where servers usually pause before clearing plates. Ashley said it was because I would be more comfortable away from the draft. There was no draft. There was only a message. I had learned in the 7 years since Daniel married her that Ashley rarely shouted when she wanted to hurt me. She preferred silk gloves, a sweet voice, a careful little smile, the kind of insult that arrived dressed as concern. "Margaret, you don't have to bring anything this time. Margaret, we are trying something a little more updated tonight. Margaret, you know Daniel is watching his cholesterol now." Each sentence had sounded harmless by itself. Put together, they built a fence around the family I had spent my life feeding. That evening, Ashley stood at the head of the table like she had invented hospitality. She told everyone she had wanted a dinner that felt warm but elevated. She said she believed family traditions were important, as long as they were refined. People nodded. Daniel smiled at her the way men smile when they are grateful no one is asking them to choose a side. I watched him take another bite of the roast. His eyes closed for half a second. He knew that flavor. I saw the memory move across his face before he pushed it away. "Well," Ashley continued, turning her fork over in her fingers, "at least this is better than the terrible family dinners Daniel grew up with." That was when the room changed. Not loudly, just enough. A pause in the clinking of silverware. Grace looked at me, her brown eyes wide and worried. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass. I waited for him to say something. Anything. Even my mother always tried. "Even don't do this, Ashley." Even a small uncomfortable laugh followed by changing the subject. But my son only reached for his water and looked at the flowers. That told me more than Ashley's insult ever could. I placed my napkin on my knee, smoothed one corner flat, and looked at the woman who had spent years trying to make me feel outdated in the family I had built from grocery budgets, Sunday dinners, birthday cakes, casseroles for neighbors, and Christmas mornings that began before sunrise. Ashley thought she was insulting a stranger in a restaurant kitchen. She thought she was safe because the person she was mocking was not in the room. But I was in the room. I was at the end of the table. I was wearing my navy dress and my mother's pearl earrings. I was watching my son pretend not to know me. And for the first time in a long time I did not feel small. I felt awake. That morning had started with Ashley's voice on the phone, bright and polished, the way it always sounded when she wanted something to seem casual. I was in my kitchen, standing in my robe beside the coffee maker, watching the first gray light settle over the backyard. The house was quiet except for the soft drip of coffee into the pot, and the old wall clock above the pantry ticking like it had all the patience in the world. Daniel used to sit at that same kitchen table before school, swinging his legs and asking if biscuits could count as breakfast and dinner. Now he lived 20 minutes away in a house where I had to be invited like a guest. My phone rang at 8:12. Ashley's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for 2 rings before answering. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, smooth as warmed honey. "I hope I did not wake you." She knew I had been awake since 6. She knew because I had always been awake early, long before anyone needed me, making lunches, folding laundry, checking the oven, setting out Daniel's baseball uniform, measuring life in small duties no one thanked you for until they were gone. "No, dear," I said. "I am up." There was a tiny pause, just long enough for her to decide which version of herself to use. "We are having a dinner tonight. Nothing too formal, just a few people from Daniel's office and some friends. I wanted to make sure you knew you were welcome. Welcome. Not wanted. Not needed. Welcome like a neighbor borrowing a chair." I looked at the little ceramic rooster on my windowsill, the one Daniel bought me at a school fair when he was 9. Its red paint had chipped along the comb. I kept it anyway. Mothers keep things long after everyone else decides they are not worth saving. "That sounds nice," I said. "What can I bring?" Ashley laughed softly. Not a warm laugh. Practiced one. "Actually, I was going to say, please do not bring food this time. We have everything handled." I let my fingers rest against the edge of the counter. The laminate was worn smooth where my hands had stood through 35 years of chopping, mixing, kneading, and waiting. "Of course. It is just that we are trying for a slightly more elevated menu," she continued. "You know, lighter, cleaner. Daniel has been so busy lately, and I want tonight to feel special. Not like one of those heavy Sunday suppers." Heavy Sunday suppers. That was what she called the meals that had held my family together after my husband died. After Daniel lost his first job. After Grace was born early and Ashley cried in my guest room because she was scared and exhausted and hungry. I had made chicken and rice that night. Ashley had eaten 2 bowls and whispered, "This tastes like home." She must have forgotten. Or maybe she remembered and hated that the comfort had come from me. "I understand," I said. She kept talking, filling the silence because silence made people like Ashley nervous. "You should just come and relax. Or something nice. We are seating everyone around 7, but maybe come a little before that. Not too early though. The caterers will be setting up." Caterers. I looked across my kitchen at the old wooden recipe box near the stove. My mother's handwriting was still on some of those cards, faded blue ink, butter stains in the corners, measurements written in cups and teaspoons, not grams and milliliters. Recipes that had crossed 3 generations of women who knew how to stretch $20 into a table full of food and make it seem like abundance. "I will be there at 6:45, I said. "Perfect," Ashley replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "And Margaret, I really do appreciate you understanding. Sometimes traditions need a little updating." After she hung up, I stood there with the phone still in my hand. The coffee had finished brewing. The clock kept ticking. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence, bright red against the pale morning. I should have felt embarrassed. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt something colder and clearer. I walked to the stove, opened the recipe box, and touched the card for peach cobbler. Daniel's favorite. Grace's too. The card still had a small brown sugar smudge from the Christmas Daniel turned 11, when he had leaned over the counter and told me no restaurant in the world could make anything better. I closed the box gently. Then I looked at the phone again. I did not know it yet, but in less than an hour another call would come. And that call would tell me exactly what kind of dinner Ashley had planned, and exactly why I needed to stay quiet. The second call came at 9:23, just as I was pouring coffee into my favorite blue mug. I almost let it go to voicemail because I did not recognize the number, but something in me picked it up on the third ring. "Mrs. Whitmore?" a man's voice asked. It was low, careful, and familiar in a way I could not place right away. "This is she." There was a soft breath on the other end, then a quiet laugh touched with surprise. "Margaret Whitmore. Well, I have not said that name out loud in years. This is Thomas Keller, Jr." I looked toward the kitchen window, and for a moment my house seemed to shift around me. Thomas Keller, Jr. The name carried the smell of brown butter, fresh thyme, polished wood floors, and the back kitchen of an old Charleston restaurant where I had once spent 3 summers helping his father rebuild a failing menu. "Tommy Keller," I said softly. "My goodness. I go by Thomas now," he said, amused. "But for you, I suppose Tommy is fair." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. My coffee steamed between my hands. How did you find me? Your daughter-in-law gave us the family name when she finalized the dinner order, he said. Whitmore. Daniel Whitmore. Then she mentioned his mother would be attending. I asked if that mother happened to be Margaret. She looked at me as if I had asked whether the moon belonged to her. I almost smiled. That sounds like Ashley. The pause that followed told me he had not called just to reminisce. I heard papers rustle on his end, then the distant clatter of a restaurant kitchen waking up for the day. Margaret, I wanted to speak to you directly before tonight. Ashley hired Kellers to prepare most of the meal. She asked for something southern, warm, traditional, but in her words, not old lady food. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Just repeated by someone who had no reason to lie to me. Old lady food. I pictured Ashley in her perfect kitchen, tapping her manicured finger against a menu, trying to purchase the feeling of family without honoring the woman who had created it for years. I see, I said. Thomas was quiet for a moment. She also sent us a list of dishes she said Daniel loved as a child. Pot roast with black pepper gravy, buttermilk biscuits, green beans with almonds, peach cobbler with cinnamon in the crust. My hand tightened around the mug. Those are my recipes. I know, he said gently. That is why I called. The kitchen around me became very still. Even the clock seemed softer. Thomas continued, his voice lowering. My father kept copies of the recipes you helped him with back in the 1990s. He always said you understood comfort food better than anyone with a culinary degree. When Kellers was struggling, you walked into that kitchen with a church cookbook, a grocery bag, and enough common sense to save us from ourselves. I remembered it then. The hot back room. Thomas as a lanky young man peeling potatoes badly. His father arguing with suppliers. Me standing at a prep table in a borrowed apron, showing them that good food did not need to shout. It only needed to tell the truth. That was a long time ago, I said. Not to us, he replied. Not to my father before he passed. Not to me. I looked at the recipe box across the kitchen. The peach cobbler card sat on top now because I had left it there after Ashley's call. A small thing. A sign perhaps. What exactly are you asking me, Thomas? He exhaled slowly. I am asking whether you would allow us to use your recipes tonight. Properly. Not the adjusted versions Ashley requested. She wanted less butter, less seasoning, less of everything that makes the food worth remembering. I told her we could handle it. But I do not want to put your family's food on that table without your blessing. A laugh almost came out of me, but it had no humor in it. My blessing. Ashley wanted my memories, my labor, my son's childhood favorites, and my mother's cobbler, all stripped of my name and served under her chandelier. I stood and walked to the counter. I opened the recipe box. The cards smelled faintly of vanilla and age. No, I said. Thomas went silent. Then I continued. Do not use your copies. I will bring the originals. Margaret, are you sure? Very sure. My voice sounded different to me. Calm. Clear. But Ashley cannot know. Another pause. She will not hear it from me. I touched the edge of the cobbler card with one finger. The blue ink had faded, but it was still legible. 6 peaches peeled and sliced. 1 cup sugar. 1 teaspoon cinnamon. A pinch of salt. There is one condition, I said. Name it. I looked at the empty chair across from me, where Daniel used to sit with crumbs on his shirt and summer sun in his hair. Let her believe the dinner is hers until dessert. Thomas did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone quiet with understanding. That is a dangerous kind of patience, Margaret. I closed the recipe box and held it against my chest. No, Thomas. It is just the kind a mother learns after being ignored for too long. After I hung up with Thomas, I stood in my kitchen with the recipe box against my chest and let the past come back in small, ordinary pieces. That was how grief and memory usually found me, not as one grand picture, but as crumbs on a counter, flour on an apron, a child's voice asking how much longer until dinner. Daniel had been a hungry boy from the moment he learned to walk. He would climb onto the stool beside the stove and watch me stir gravy as if I were performing magic. Is it ready yet, Mom? He would ask every 3 minutes, his hair sticking up in the back, his sneakers leaving mud on my clean floor. I always pretended to be annoyed, but I loved it. I loved the way he believed the kitchen was the center of the world because, in our house, it was. When his father worked late, I kept a plate warm for him. When Daniel lost a baseball game, I made biscuits and honey. When the first girl broke his heart, he sat at this very table, too proud to cry, while I put peach cobbler in front of him and said nothing. He ate 2 servings and finally whispered, "I hate feeling stupid." I touched his shoulder and told him loving someone was never stupid. I wondered years later if he remembered that. I wondered if he remembered any of it when Ashley began laughing at the things that had once comforted him. First, she was careful. During their first Thanksgiving together, she praised my turkey, then added that she usually preferred something lighter. The next Christmas, she asked if I had ever considered using less butter, because people were becoming more health conscious now. At Grace's 3rd birthday, she ordered cupcakes from a boutique bakery downtown and moved my homemade cake to the laundry room, saying there was not enough space on the dessert table. Daniel noticed. I saw him notice. He just did not bring it back. That was the beginning of a habit that would hurt more than Ashley's words ever could. A daughter-in-law could be rude. A son had to choose silence. And Daniel chose it again and again until silence became the language we spoke best. I opened the recipe box and pulled out the cards one by one. Pot roast, biscuits, green beans, peach cobbler. My mother's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, firm and neat, the kind of handwriting women used when they believed what they were leaving behind mattered. I laid the cards across the table like evidence. Not evidence for a court, not evidence for strangers, but evidence for myself. Proof that I had not imagined the life I gave them. Proof that there had been birthdays, snow days, Sunday suppers, scraped knees, report cards, and late-night talks. Proof that I had fed a family before I was treated like a guest in it. Around 11, I dressed carefully. I chose my navy dress, the one that fell below my knees and made my shoulders look straighter than I felt. I pinned my silver hair back, put on my mother's pearl earrings, and packed the recipe cards in a white envelope. Then I drove 8 miles to Keller's, past oak trees heavy with Spanish moss and brick houses that had watched Charleston change without ever seeming surprised. Thomas met me at the back entrance, wearing a chef's coat with the sleeves rolled up. For a moment he did not say anything. He just looked at the envelope in my hand and nodded. Inside the kitchen, the air was warm with onions, herbs, and rising bread. Young cooks moved around us quickly, but Thomas led me to a prep table in the corner as if he were bringing me to a place that had been waiting. I placed the cards down. My fingers lingered on the cobbler recipe. "This one matters," I said. Thomas softened. "For Daniel." I looked at the stained card and thought of my son lowering his eyes while his wife erased me one polite sentence at a time. "No," I said. "For me." By noon, the kitchen at Keller's had become the kind of place I had almost forgotten I knew how to enter without apology. Thomas gave me an apron, plain white, tied at the waist, and for the first time that day my hands stopped feeling useless. I washed them at the steel sink, rolled my sleeves to my elbows, and began where every honest meal begins, with the small things no one praises but everyone tastes. Salt measured in the palm, pepper cracked fresh, butter left on the counter until it softened properly, onions sliced thin enough to disappear into gravy. The young cooks watched me at first with polite curiosity, the way people watch an old woman doing something they assume will be slow. After 20 minutes they stopped watching that way. They began asking questions. One girl named Marissa wanted to know why I browned the roast longer than the printed order said. I told her color was flavor, and flavor needed patience. A young man with a tattoo on his wrist asked why I folded the biscuit dough instead of pressing it flat. I told him biscuits were like people. The more roughly you handled them, the less tender they became. Thomas heard that and smiled into his clipboard. By 2 o'clock, the first roast was in the oven, low and steady. By 3, the biscuit dough was resting under a towel. By 4, peaches were bubbling gently with cinnamon, sugar and lemon juice, filling the kitchen with a smell so familiar it made my throat tighten. I did not cry. I had already done enough crying in rooms where no one noticed. Instead I worked. I stirred. I tasted. I adjusted. I wrote the final menu in my own handwriting and watched Thomas tuck it into his folder without Ashley's name on it. Around 5 his phone rang. He stepped into the hallway, but the kitchen was not far enough away for me to miss the tone of Ashley's voice through the speaker. She was anxious and excited. which for Ashley sounded almost the same. She wanted to confirm the hydrangeas had been placed on the dining table, that the food would arrive at exactly 6:15, that the blogger would be impressed by the presentation, and that everything would feel, as she put it, effortlessly personal. Effortless. That word stayed with me. Women like Ashley loved calling things effortless after other people had spent hours making them beautiful. When Thomas returned, he looked embarrassed, though he had done nothing wrong. She asked again whether we could make sure nothing seemed too rustic, he said. I wiped my hands on the apron. Rustic means she wants comfort without fingerprints. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. At 5:30, I removed the apron and changed back into my navy dress in the small restroom near the office. I brushed flour from my sleeve, pinned my hair again, and checked my reflection under the harsh light. I looked tired. I also looked steady. On the drive to Daniel and Ashley's house, the sky had turned the soft gold color that Charleston gets before evening, the kind of light that makes even expensive homes look gentle. Ashley's house glowed at the end of the driveway, every window lit, every shrub trimmed, every porch chair angled as if a magazine photographer might arrive at any moment. Through the front window, I saw her moving quickly from room to room, adjusting flowers, straightening napkins, inspecting the world she had arranged to admire her. When I rang the bell, she opened the door wearing a cream blouse, pearl earrings larger than mine, and a smile so bright it nearly erased the impatience behind it. "Margaret, you made it," she said, as if there had been reasonable doubt. "Come in. Everyone is almost here." She kissed the air near my cheek and glanced at my empty hands. I saw the satisfaction pass across her face. No casserole dish. No pie plate. No old-fashioned embarrassment to hide before her guests arrived. "You look nice," she added, already turning away. "Not lovely. Not beautiful. Nice," the smallest compliment that could still pass as manners. Daniel came from the living room with a glass in his hand. He hugged me quickly, one arm, careful not to wrinkle his shirt. "Hey, Mom. Glad you could come." I breathed in the familiar scent of his aftershave and waited, foolishly, for warmth. It did not come. Grace was the one who gave it to me. She hurried down the stairs in a blue dress and wrapped both arms around my waist. "Grandma," she whispered, "I wish you were sitting by me." Ashley heard her and laughed lightly. "Sweetheart, the seating is already done." Of course it was. I found my place card at the far end of the table, near the kitchen doorway, exactly where a woman could be present without being central. At the other end, Ashley's name sat beside Daniel's, close to his boss, the blogger, and the best light in the room. I sat down quietly and placed my purse at my feet. From the kitchen came the first warm scent of black pepper gravy. Daniel lifted his head slightly, almost like a boy hearing his mother call him home. Ashley noticed too, and smiled proudly at her guests as they began to arrive. She had built her stage perfectly. She just did not know who had written the script. The first course arrived under Ashley's direction, though she had never touched a pan that day. She stood beside the table while the servers from Keller's placed the platters down, her hands clasped in front of her like a hostess in a lifestyle magazine. "I wanted tonight to feel intimate," she said, looking toward the food blogger, a young woman named Claire Bennett who had already taken 3 photographs of the dining room. Nothing fussy, nothing old-fashioned, just elevated family comfort. The words floated across the table and settled near me like dust. Elevated family comfort. That was what she called food after removing the hands that made it meaningful. Daniel's boss, Mr. Harding, leaned over his plate and inhaled appreciatively. "This smells incredible." His wife nodded before she even tasted it. "It reminds me of Sunday dinner at my grandmother's house, but prettier." Ashley laughed with perfect modesty. That was exactly the feeling I wanted. I picked up my fork and looked down at the roast on my plate. It had been sliced neatly, the gravy spooned across it just enough to shine under the candlelight. The carrots were tender but not collapsing. The potatoes had browned edges. The biscuits sat in a linen basket, golden and quiet, giving off a warmth that reached me before I touched them. I knew every inch of that meal. I knew where the pepper would land at the back of the tongue. I knew the gravy would taste plain for 1 second, then deepen. I knew the biscuits would split cleanly if people used their fingers instead of knives. Across the table, Daniel took his first bite. He stopped moving. It was not dramatic. No one else noticed. But I did. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His face softened before he remembered where he was and straightened again. For one small second my boy was back at my kitchen table. Then Ashley said his name and the man returned. "Daniel, tell Claire how much thought went into this menu," she prompted. Daniel wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Ashley has been planning it all week," he said. "Not a lie exactly. Just not the truth." Claire looked impressed. "It has that rare quality people try to fake. It feels personal." Ashley's smile widened. "I believe a home should tell a story." I almost set my fork down then. Instead, I took a careful sip of water. Home should tell a story. Our old home had told one. Fingerprints on the refrigerator. A chipped mug by the sink. Baseball schedules under magnets. My late husband William reading the paper while Daniel stole biscuit corners before dinner. Ashley's house told a different story. Everything matched. Nothing remembered. The compliments continued as the meal moved around the table. Mr. Harding asked which restaurant inspired the gravy. Claire said the biscuits had real memory in them. Grace smiled at me when she tasted hers, then looked confused, as if her mouth had recognized something her mind had not been allowed to name. I gave her the smallest smile back. Ashley saw the exchange. Her expression changed so quickly most people would have missed it. A flicker of irritation. A need to reclaim the room. She leaned back in her chair and gave a soft laugh. "You know, this is exactly why I wanted professionals tonight. Family dinners can be sweet, of course, but sometimes they are just." She tilted her head, pretending to search for a kind word and choosing not to find one. "A little tired." Daniel looked at his plate. Grace looked at him. I looked at Ashley. Claire, sensing a quote, lifted her pen. Ashley continued, encouraged by the attention. "When Daniel and I were first married, Margaret used to insist on making these heavy meals. Pot roast, biscuits, cobbler, all of that. I know she meant well, but honestly, some of those dinners were memorable for the wrong reasons." A few guests gave careful smiles. The kind people use when they do not know whether cruelty is being served as humor. My fork rested beside my plate. I did not move it. Ashley turned toward me with a sweetness sharp enough to cut thread. "You understand, Margaret. It was a different generation. People used to cook with so much butter and salt. We know better now." I looked at Daniel again. This time I did not look away quickly. I gave him space to remember me, to defend me, to be the boy who once said my peach cobbler could fix any bad day. He swallowed, reached for his glass and said nothing. That silence was not empty. It was full. Full of every holiday I had been asked to step aside. Full of every dish Ashley had hidden in the kitchen. Full of every moment Daniel had decided peace at his table was worth more than dignity at mine. Ashley lifted her wine glass. Whoever made some of those old family dinners should have come with a warning label. The table laughed lightly, uncertainly. Grace did not. I folded my napkin once across my lap. From the kitchen I could smell peaches warming for dessert. Cinnamon. Sugar. A pinch of salt. The truth was almost ready. The dessert plates arrived slower than the dinner plates had. And for the first time all evening, Ashley seemed impatient. She glanced toward the kitchen twice, then looked at Claire Bennett's notebook as if she could will the right words onto the page. The dining room had grown warmer from the candles and conversation, but underneath it ran a thin current of discomfort. People were still smiling, still polite, still pretending they had not heard Ashley turn a family history into a joke. That is another thing I had learned with age. Most people do not stop cruelty when it appears in good lighting. They wait to see who has permission to object. Grace sat very still beside her father, her hands folded around her water glass. She had her mother's cheekbones, Daniel's eyes, and something softer that I prayed the world would not teach out of her. When the first bowl of peach cobbler was placed in front of her, she leaned forward. I saw recognition bloom before she spoke. It was not a thought yet. It was memory. Cinnamon, peaches, brown sugar, the faint brightness of lemon, crust tender enough to break under a spoon. Her eyes lifted to mine. "Grandma," she said quietly, "is this your cobbler?" The question landed gently, but the room heard it. Daniel turned toward her. Ashley's smile held for 1 second too long. Claire stopped writing. I did not answer right away. I looked at the bowl in front of me, At the golden crust cracked open to show the fruit beneath. It looked exactly as it had on Daniel's 12th birthday, when he asked for cobbler instead of cake. It looked exactly as it had the day Grace came home from the hospital, when Ashley ate it barefoot in my kitchen and cried because she was tired and afraid she was not doing motherhood right. "Sweetheart," Ashley said, her voice light but tight. "It is peach cobbler. Lots of people make peach cobbler." Grace frowned. "But Grandma puts cinnamon in the crust. And she leaves some of the peaches bigger because Dad likes them that way." Daniel's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. I watched the memory reach him again, stronger this time. He looked down at the cobbler as if it had spoken his name. Ashley laughed, but the sound had no warmth left in it. "That is adorable, Grace, but Keller's made dessert tonight. Remember? This is professional." Professional. I almost smiled at that. My mother's recipe had survived church basements, school bake sales, funeral luncheons, first birthdays, homesickness, heartbreak, and 30 years of my son's appetite. Now it had been promoted because strangers served it on white plates. Before anyone could rescue the silence, the kitchen door opened. Thomas stepped into the dining room in his chef's coat, carrying a small leather folder. He did not look at Ashley first. He looked at me. That alone changed the air. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly, "I wanted to thank you before the evening got away from us." Ashley blinked. "Thomas, is something wrong?" He turned to her with perfect courtesy. "Nothing at all, Mrs. Whitmore. I only thought your guests should know where tonight's menu truly came from." The color in Ashley's face shifted, not gone, just unsettled. "We already told them Keller's catered. Keller's prepared and served it," Thomas said. "But the recipes belong to Margaret." The room did not gasp. Real moments rarely sound that dramatic. What happened was quieter. Forks paused. Eyes moved. A chair creaked. Claire's pen hovered above the page. Daniel looked at me, then really looked, and the expression on his face was not pride. Not yet. It was embarrassment arriving late. Thomas continued, calm as Sunday morning. "Your mother-in-law brought the original cards to our kitchen this afternoon. Pot roast, biscuits, green beans, gravy, and the peach cobbler. Some of those recipes go back decades. My father knew her as Maggie Whitmore, though most people in Charleston who remember her food called her Chef Maggie." Claire's head lifted sharply. "Chef Maggie Whitmore," she said. "From the old Keller's Sunday supper column?" Thomas smiled. "The very same." Ashley's fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass. "There must be some misunderstanding. Margaret never mentioned anything to me." I finally looked at her. "You asked me not to bring food." The sentence was soft. It did not need to be louder. Mr. Harding leaned back slightly, his face unreadable. His wife looked from Ashley to me with the careful sadness of a woman old enough to understand more than she would say in public. Claire set her pen down, then picked it up again. Grace smiled, small and bright, not because Ashley was embarrassed, but because something true had been returned to its rightful place. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. I had waited years for my son to find words when I needed them. Now that the truth had entered without his help, his silence looked different. Smaller. Ashley tried to recover. Women like her always do. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "I suppose that explains why it tasted so traditional." No one laughed with her this time. Thomas looked at me once more. He did not defend me further. He did not need to. The room had already heard enough. I picked up my spoon and took one bite of the cobbler. It was warm. It was exactly right. And for the first time that evening, I let myself taste it. Ashley's face did not fall all at once. It changed in stages, like a curtain being lowered slowly in front of a window. First came the quick smile, the one she used when she believed she could still charm her way out of a mistake. Then came the small laugh, polished and thin. Then came the blinking, faster than usual, as she realized no one at the table was rushing to help her. I had watched her control rooms for years. She controlled them with seating charts, compliments shaped like corrections, and little stories told at just the right volume. But this room had shifted without asking her permission. The food had told on her. Thomas stood quietly near the kitchen door, the leather folder still in his hand. Claire Bennett had stopped pretending to be only a guest. Her eyes were bright with the focus of someone who had found the real story underneath the decorated one. Mr. Harding looked uncomfortable, but not in a way that blamed me. His wife gave me a soft nod across the table, barely visible but enough. Grace was smiling into her cobbler like it had given her something back. Daniel was the only person I could not read. He sat with his spoon in his hand, looking from Ashley to Thomas to me, as if the years had become too heavy to hold in silence. Ashley set her wineglass down carefully. "Well, Margaret," she said, still trying to sound amused, "you could have told me. I would have loved to give you credit. That was almost impressive." She had taken my recipes, erased my name, mocked the memory attached to them, and now wanted to sound generous for offering me credit after being caught. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin. I took my time. Age teaches you that silence can make people hear themselves better than any argument. "No, Ashley," I said finally. "You would not have." The room went still again. Her smile froze. Daniel whispered, "Mom." Not a warning. Not quite. More like a plea for me to keep the peace he had never protected. I looked at him, and I saw the little boy he had been, the young man he became, and the husband who had learned to lower his eyes when his wife was unkind. "Daniel, peace that requires one person to disappear is not peace." He looked down at the table. This time I did not soften the sentence for him. Ashley leaned back. "I think this is getting a little dramatic." There it was. The word people use when truth begins inconveniencing them. Dramatic. Sensitive. Misunderstood. Overreacting. I had worn all of them like coats someone else kept putting on my shoulders. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "You praised this dinner when you thought it reflected well on you. You mocked it when you thought it belonged to me. That tells me the problem was never the food." Ashley opened her mouth, but nothing useful came out. I turned slightly so I was not speaking only to her. But I did not raise my voice. For years, I wondered if I was becoming old-fashioned. Too much butter. Too much salt. Too simple. Too much of a reminder that Daniel came from a kitchen smaller than this dining room. I let myself believe maybe I was the one who needed to step back. Tonight helped me understand something. I looked at the candles, the perfect flowers, the shining plates. All of it arranged to make a family look more gracious than it felt. You did not want tradition updated. You wanted it without me in it. Grace's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Good girl, I thought. Save your tears for places where they can water something. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. "Mom, I did not know you cooked all this." I looked at him with a sadness so old it felt almost calm. "No. But you knew she was laughing at me." That landed harder than anything Thomas had said. Daniel's face changed. Not because I had embarrassed him, but because I had removed the last place he could hide. Ashley turned to him quickly. "Daniel, do not let her twist this." I stood before he could answer. The chair made a soft sound against the rug. Every eye followed me, but I felt no need to perform. I picked up my purse from beside my feet and took the white envelope from inside it. The remaining recipe cards were there, except one. I placed the envelope near Grace, not Ashley, not Daniel. "These are copies," I said. "The originals are going back home with me." Grace touched the envelope with careful fingers. "Grandma, someday if you still want to learn, I will teach you. But recipes are not just ingredients. They are respect. They are memory. They are knowing whose hands came before yours." Then I looked at Ashley one last time. Her perfect house, her perfect table, her perfect story had developed a crack down the center, and all I had done was tell the truth in a steady voice. "You did not hate the dinner, Ashley. You hated the idea that it came from me." No one laughed. No one rescued her. Thomas stepped aside as I walked toward the hallway. Behind me, Daniel said my name, but softly, too late, the way people call after a train that has already started moving. I did not turn around. For once, I let him feel what it was like to watch someone leave the table and not come back when called. The night air outside Ashley's house felt cooler than it had any right to feel in Charleston. I stood on the porch for a moment with my hand on the railing, listening to the muffled sounds behind the front door. Not shouting. Not chaos. Just the uncomfortable quiet of people rearranging what they thought they knew. My car was parked near the end of the driveway, under a live oak whose branches bent low over the brick path. I walked slowly, not because I was weak, but because I refused to hurry away from a place where I had done nothing wrong. Behind me, the door opened. Daniel stepped onto the porch. Mom, please wait. I stopped beside my car but did not turn around right away. The porch light put his shadow across the driveway, long and thin. I should have said something, he said. His voice sounded smaller than it had at the table. Yes, I answered. You should have. He came down the steps, stopping a few feet from me like he was not sure he had the right to stand closer. I did not know she had hired Kellers. I did not know those were your recipes. I turned then. Daniel, the recipes were not the part that needed defending. He looked at me as if the sentence had taken the breath out of him. I know. But I was not sure he did. Not yet. Sons can love their mothers and still become strangers to their pain, when another woman teaches them that discomfort is the same as conflict. I had excused him for years because he was busy, because marriage was complicated, because I did not want to be the mother who made things hard. That night I realized I had made things too easy. I opened my car door. I am going home. His eyes filled, but he held himself still. Can I come by tomorrow? I looked past him to the house, where Ashley's perfect curtains glowed in the windows. Come if you are coming to listen. Not if you are coming to explain her. Then I drove away. The streets were quiet, lined with sleeping houses and porch flags shifting in the soft breeze. When I got home, I did not turn on every light the way I usually did after an upsetting evening. I turned on one lamp in the kitchen. That was enough. The recipe box sat where I had left it, old and plain and more honest than anything on Ashley's table. I took out the original peach cobbler card and placed it back in the front, where it belonged. Then I made tea, sat at my table, and let the silence be mine instead of something forced on me. The next morning, Daniel arrived at 10 with no Ashley beside him. He stood in my doorway holding a grocery store bouquet, the kind men buy when they know flowers are not enough but do not know what else to bring. I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he had done homework, eaten toast, and once told me he was afraid to become a father. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then he said, I have been letting her make you smaller because it made my life easier. I looked at my son, really looked. The boy was still there, but so was the man who had hurt me by avoiding the cost of kindness. Yes, I said. He nodded, swallowing hard. I am sorry, Mom. I believed that he meant it. I also knew an apology was a doorway, not a house. I do not need you to choose between your wife and your mother, I told him. I need you to choose between truth and convenience. He lowered his head. I understand. Maybe he did. Maybe he was only beginning to. That was all right. Beginning was more than he had given me before. Later that week, Claire Bennett published her column about the dinner. She wrote about heritage recipes, invisible labor, and the women whose names disappear from family tables while their work remains. She did not humiliate Ashley directly. She did not need to. Anyone who had been in that dining room understood every carefully chosen word. Thomas called me afterward and asked if I would consider helping Kellers with a monthly Sunday supper menu. I laughed for the first time in days, a real laugh, rusty but alive. Thomas, I am 68 years old. He said. That is not a no. He was right. 2 Sundays later, Grace came over with a notebook and a pencil. Daniel drove her, but he did not come inside until I invited him. That mattered. Grace stood at my counter while I showed her how to peel peaches without wasting the fruit. She listened when I told her that cinnamon belonged in the crust only if she was willing to be patient with the dough. Daniel sat at the table watching quietly, not taking over, not explaining, just present. When the cobbler went into the oven, Grace leaned her head against my shoulder and said, I knew it was yours, Grandma. I closed my eyes for 1 second. I know you did, sweetheart. Outside, the afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor. Inside, butter warmed, peaches softened, and something I thought had been taken from me began returning in small, steady pieces. Not everything was fixed. Families do not heal just because one truth is spoken aloud. But that night at Ashley's table had taught me something I should have remembered sooner. A woman does not become less valuable because someone seats her near the kitchen. Sometimes that is exactly where her power has been waiting.